Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, we'll hear from 5 Ontario mayors on why they want to see a tougher approach taken on the homelessness and substance abuse crisis. Then, journalist and Anglican priest Michael Coren returns to discuss his journey from media firebrand to progressive Christian. That's all next on the agenda. A couple of months ago, we had 4 Ontario mayors on this program sharing their solutions to the homelessness and addiction crisis in their communities. We got some feedback on that episode from other mayors who said, however well-intentioned those solutions were, ultimately, they probably wouldn't get the job done because they weren't radical enough. Let's hear those arguments tonight. And so we welcome, in Kingston, Ontario, Mayor Brian Patterson. In Oshawa, Ontario, Mayor Dan Carter. And here in our studio, Chan Liggett, she is the mayor of Cambridge. Kevin Davis is the mayor of Brantford. And Alex Nuttall is the mayor of Barrie. And we are delighted to welcome you 3 here to our table in Midtown Toronto, and to our mayors and points beyond. Thank you for joining us on TVO tonight as well. I just want to bring up a couple of the bullet points here from the resolution that the Ontario Big City Mayors Caucus passed on this past Friday regarding the homelessness encampments, addiction issues in this province. Here is some of what was agreed to by the Big City Mayors Caucus. Sheldon, bring this graphic up if you would, please. Establish a priority in maintaining public safety to allow stronger deterrence to social disruption and public safety risks. Seek intervener status in court cases that restrict cities from regulating and prohibiting encampments. Introduce legislation to prohibit public intoxication and public use of drugs. A quick build of supportive housing units, and review and update the Mental Health Act and the Health Care Consent Act to expand the scope of mandatory addiction care and treatment. Okay, Mayor Davis, what is different about this approach from perhaps the approach taken by the other 4 mayors who were on this program a little while ago?
Steve, it's actually complementary. It comes out of the meeting we had in August where we passed the Solve the Crisis resolution, which was the subject of your prior show. At that meeting, some of us decided that we needed to be a little more specific in terms of what we were asking the provincial and federal governments to do. I was asked to prepare a draft resolution, which is what I did, and that was considered by the same group this past Friday. So it was really, I call it supplementary, kind of a follow-up to the Solve the Crisis resolution.
It's sure, Mayor Carter, I'm going to bring you in for the supplementary here, because you may be the only politician I know who's actually lived in the streets, having suffered from addiction issues many years ago. What do you think about this approach will get you closer to where we need to go?
Well, first of all, it's great to be able to be with you and our colleagues that are there. And a special thanks to, of course, your in-studio guests that played a significant role in regards to bringing this forward. I think the reality being is that all of us are witness in our community that what we're doing at this particular time is not what our intent is. And our intent is to make sure that every child that is out on the streets, and there's somebody child, that we are doing everything we possibly can to save their lives and make sure that they are on the right pathways in regards to better health and better outcomes. And I think that's what the intent is. As a recovering alcoholic and drug addict myself, intervention has played a significant role in regards to my own recovery. And I think that that's where I think we need to really say to everyone, let's find a way of being able to introduce compassionate intervention, and let's find a way of being able to help these individuals that are suffering. By the way, the toxicity of the drugs that are out on the streets right now is nothing that we've ever seen in this country before. So I think it's time for bold action and big steps. And I think that this motion, along with our colleagues, is taking this opportunity to be able to move forward with it. So again, as intervention plays a significant role in regards to what we're trying to accomplish.
Let me, Mayor Liggett, figure out what bolder action means. For example, you say you need stronger deterrence to ensure public safety. What does that actually look like?
Well, a stronger deterrence without the police enforcing some of the laws that we already have in place, and I think there's some reticence on their behalf. We also need courts to enforce once the police bring that forward. We need the courts to be able to have some sort of verdict come down as to what happens to the people, and you know, with the lack of with the lack of resources for that, it really gets very difficult. There are some municipalities where the police actually will walk up and take drugs away from people when they see that happening. But we also have a provincial chief of police association who sort of makes up the rules for all of the police departments. So until they start all doing that, we're not going to get anywhere.
Which is what you want? You want them all to do that?
Yes, I would like to see them all do that, because then that gives the incentive to the addict to, if they can't find another drug source quickly, then they have to look at what they're going to do to help themselves out of the situation. So people talk about how you can't force somebody to go to rehab. Well, yeah, we can force somebody to go to rehab if the deterrents are there.
Okay, let me pick up on that with Mayor Patterson, because again, one of the provisions of the agreement that was passed last Friday is expand the scope of mandatory addiction care and treatment. So Mayor Patterson, what does that actually look like?
Well, I mean, I think the starting point is to recognize that we already have a system of mandatory treatment that's in place. I think that the issue, and really this was really at the heart of the discussion that we had as a group on Friday, is do we need to have a look at that system? Does that system need to be updated? Does it need to be modernized? I think recognizing, as Mayor Carter has said, that the conditions and the challenges that we're seeing with the drug toxicity crisis, the sort of behaviors that we're seeing, the sort of challenges to our communities, to say, okay, do we need to change the approaches and how this is working on the ground? And I would suggest that I think we can all agree that the system that's in place is not working. The status quo is not okay. And so this is one of many different tools that I think we could look at to, again, take an empathetic and compassionate approach to those that are suffering with addictions and mental health, and also find those solutions that work best for the community as a whole. So, on the one hand, we're pushing for more resources and more treatment and more supportive housing, but we're also saying that maybe looking at the Mental Health Act that hasn't been updated in 30 years, that's something we should be doing as well.
Mayor Nuttall, let me try to characterize what I think some people have, objective observers have said, this is the approach you're looking at, and you tell me if I'm right or off base. This approach appears to be less concerned about niceties around civil rights and more concerned about actually getting a job done, more concerned about getting people who are a harm to themselves and others off that situation. Is that fair to say, to characterize it that way?
Yeah, Steve, I think that's taking one side of the equation into consideration. I think we have to remember that these parks where folks are overdosing, where they're leaving needles, where in some cases becoming violent, having psychotic episodes, those are places where others have civil rights to be as well, where children have the opportunity to go and play with their families and friends, where they have the right to be safe, where they have the right to be part of their community. And so I think the balance here is helping the individual who's going through these types of episodes and this type of addiction and these behaviors, and at the same time looking at those in our community who are trying to use these parks, which oftentimes are beside schools, for what they were designed to be used for, which is a safe place for kids and for families to play. So I think the resolution as a whole is trying to walk that balance between how do we help those who are hurting, and at the same time, how do we ensure that we have safety and security inside of our communities.
And follow up with you. Would you like to see the use of the notwithstanding clause used by either federal or provincial parliaments in order to give you folks more power to do what you think needs doing here?
Steve, I think it's something that's already happening across the country, and I think it's something that has to be considered. And I'll give you an example, that something that people know a lot about, and that's bail reform. And a lot of people criticize the federal Liberal government, the Trudeau government, for the bail reform package they brought in 2 to 3 years ago. All they really did was they simply codified decisions and principles that were decided by the Supreme Court of Canada. And so if you're going to deal, if you're a government, you're going to deal with bail reform in a meaningful way, you're probably going to have to use Section 33. But if I put it in the context of what we're talking about with the homelessness and whatnot, I liken it this way. So as an elected official, when I make decisions, a lot of what I'm trying to consider is the future. What's the impact of whatever we're doing on our community, on the people in our community? Is it generally good for our community? So I try to be future forward looking. And the difficulty with courts is courts don't think that way. They tend to be looking in the past and looking at what was done in the past and did that comply with the charter. Where the difficulty is, once a court determines that, like a court determines that there was, say, an infraction of bylaw, it was in violation of a charter right, they then determine whether there's reasonable justification. If they determine there wasn't, they then look at what could be done. So now they're getting into making a decision on public policy. That's forward-looking. And the whole court mechanism in terms of the kind of evidence they have, the input they have, it just is not the same as what an elected official does. We have so much input when we make a decision like this, plus we're making a decision that's a group decision. A judge is acting by themselves, and I have found in my experience that the best decisions are made in a group. So I think what's happening...
Judges can act as a group as well.
But the difficulty is the courts are not, I don't think, set up, because once they get into deciding public policy, then it gets really messy. For example, there are a number of court decisions in BC and in Alberta and also in Ontario on encampments. It's really difficult to pull from those court decisions a coherent set of principles that apply in every community. That's the challenge. And so then it becomes a situation where you really don't know what the law is.
Let me try going to Mayor Carter on this, because when people start hearing that governments potentially want to use the notwithstanding clause of the Constitution to set aside constitutionally protected rights because the legislatures, the elected legislatures, think they've got a better idea, obviously some people get skittish. So what's your view on the advisability of using that part of our Constitution to set aside civil rights because you think what's going on right now is so urgent it's required?
Mm-hmm.
So understand, this is my opinion. And my opinion is we are in a crisis across this nation, matter of fact, across North America. I think it's about time that we take bold steps to be able to address the worst healthcare crisis this country has ever seen. We've got to take whatever steps are necessary to be able to save the lives of those that are suffering in addiction and mental health. We're not doing enough. We need different tools. We're bringing ideas and solutions forward. I urge the provincial and federal government to get uncomfortable, to take on this challenge and say, the reason why we're doing this is because of the reason that we want to save your child's life. Do you know 46,000 people have died with drug poisoning since 2016 across this country. We continue to see people die on our streets. We can't sit by and continue to do what we've been doing and say, well, we'll get there someday. Someday is today. It has to change today. It's worth the fight, and I think it's worth the challenge itself. I think it'll bring it as a national conversation that absolutely needs to be to happen. So do I encourage the provincial and federal government to take the appropriate steps? Absolutely, and I want to see it done immediately.
Mayor Leggett.
Thank you. We must remember that when the Charter of Rights was brought in, we didn't have this crisis. It didn't exist.
Right. That was 40 years ago.
Exactly. And so now we're looking at mental health problems where people have psychotic episodes and hurt people badly on the street. We have an entire generation of people who are addicted and may never come out of that addiction. We may have to look after them for the rest of their lives, but that number keeps growing over and over and over again. And I'm sure if the writers of the Charter of Rights could have foreseen this, they would have put some caveat in there in order to protect us today. But it's not there. So that means we have to pick up the next stage of that. And so there's some of us here today, maybe all of us here today, who would like to see the notwithstanding clause used. And I'm one of them. It didn't pass through the big city mayors. We had a conversation about it. Not everybody was on board, and we didn't want to push that. But that doesn't mean we haven't opened the door for it. It doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to press for that and maybe another way. But I strongly believe, and I'm being a leader of my community and representing the people of my community, I want to see it used, and I'll bet you the majority of mayors in this province would as well.
Let me get Mayor Nuttall on this. Do you think we need to get, as Mayor Carter says, uncomfortable with the notion of taking away the civil rights of people who are struggling with homelessness and addiction for what they would consider to be a greater good?
Well, Steve, if you think back to 30 years ago before the closure of mental health institutions in this province, it wasn't unconstitutional. There were beds, there were opportunities. Was it done perfectly? No. Were there problems with it? Yes. But the reality is that today we're now living those problems out in parks and in public spaces that were previously lived out inside of institutions. So the request to the provincial and federal government, let me be very clear. I have requested publicly Premier Ford and Prime Minister Trudeau to use the notwithstanding clause to create legislation to allow municipalities to gain back control of public spaces. I think that you'll find that there's certainly on this panel some widespread support for that. Kevin has done a ton in terms of putting that into a motion, and we didn't adopt all pieces. That piece wasn't inside of it. But outside of big city mayors, the answer is yes. We cannot get control back without the use of the notwithstanding clause. That's the reality. We know that. We need the provincial and federal governments to step up with competent legislation that restores safety, security, and helps those individuals who are suffering from addictions and mental health issues.
In which case, I'll ask Mayor Patterson, do you think the Big City Mayors Caucus chickened out by not going forward with this notwithstanding clause aspect?
No, I wouldn't characterize it that way at all. I mean, I think we had a very robust conversation about, how do we address the real challenges that we're seeing? And, perhaps I'm, more of a moderate in the group. I too, tended to kind of stop short about saying, do we need the notwithstanding clause if we already have a system of mandatory treatment that's already in place? So this is not new. As a community, as a country, as a province, for years, we have a system right now that if someone is a danger to themselves and a danger to others, that they can be detained and get the help that they need. So it's not clear to me that we necessarily need to bring in that hammer. I think what we do need to do is review and say, maybe we need to take the existing system that's already there and expand it. So as my colleagues around the table who, quite frankly, I agree with the goal here that we want to get people the help that they need. So let's find that way. So I think that there's a really important nuance here that I think that came out in that discussion of the group, is to say, let's review the Mental Health Act. Let's review the system that's already in place and say, how do we, expand it or strengthen it to make sure that we're addressing the problems that we're seeing on the street? And I absolutely agree with my colleagues around the table on this, that something has to be done. The status quo isn't working. And so let's work together on finding that way forward.
Mayor Carter, do you think this group put too much water in its wine, taking, if I can mix my metaphors here, too much of the teeth out of the idea that you guys are putting forward here?
You know what? I mean, I have a very strong opinion in regards to taking on this fight, and I think it's worth a fight. But I also respect my colleagues and the caucus itself in regards to the decisions it made. I think it's giving everyone a fair opportunity to be able to answer the call. We're challenging the Premier and the ministers and, of course, the federal government to do the right thing because of our belief that this is an inhumane way of being able to deal with things. So in my own personal opinion, I wish that we were a lot more forceful in regards to it, and I wish that there was more talk about compassion and intervention. But I think the spirit of this organization and the caucus itself has the intent of not only challenging those that are charged with the duty of governing our municipalities and our province and our country, but also the opportunity to be able to say to all of us, what we're doing right now isn't working, so let's take some bold steps, let's take on the fights, and let's move forward. So personally, I really feel that we're at that moment. We can't be cutting around the edges. We've got to get right to the center of this and take it head on.
Mayor Davis, you don't have the power to do this. You need Premier Ford to say, yes, I'm prepared to use the notwithstanding clause to set aside these civil rights because the situation is so urgent, and therefore we'll give you the power to do what you feel you need to do. That's the argument you're making to Doug Ford. Have you heard back from him on whether he's prepared to entertain that idea?
Well, Steve, that's not the argument we're making. If you look at what the OBCM has done, and the essence of what we're asking the province to, in particular, look at for example, a drug diversion court, and implementing that province-wide and providing the necessary supports for that. And
You're not
also,
making that argument. You're not making the
no,
argument.
we're making that argument. And when it comes to the mental health,
No, you're not making the argument about the notwithstanding clause because you put water in your wine and decided to pull that.
But you're
to get a resolution.
But you seem to be suggesting that you have to use a Section 33 notwithstanding clause. You want to improve the mental health act. That's not necessarily the case.
I'm not saying you have to do anything. I'm just saying, obviously, Mayor Liggett's one, Mayor Nuttall's another one, Mayor Carter's another one, who says that you may have to do this. Have you asked the Premier if he'd do it? And if so, what did he say?
Well, the OBCM has asked the province to do an in-depth review of the Mental Health Act and also the Drug Diversion Court System, also the Trespass to Property Act, and that's what we're looking forward to the province doing, taking an in-depth look at that. And depending on what they decide they do to respond to this, it may, by necessity, require use of the Section 33 notwithstanding clause. But that's not the thrust of what we're asking the province to do.
Do you think you should be asking the province to use the notwithstanding clause?
It depends on what it is you're trying to do and whether or not you think you need to use a Section 33 notwithstanding clause to achieve it, right? I gave you the example of bail reform. If you're going to do bail reform, you have to consider it. It depends on what you do with the Mental Health Act. For example, community treatment orders. They're a great method for encouraging people to continue with receiving the treatment they receive. And that's where they're released from a facility and they have to follow a treatment program and community nurses check on them. The problem I'm hearing from those who are involved in that system is it's not long enough. They're only in place for 6 months. So, for example, one of the things the province can do is extend the period for community treatment orders. Would that require Section 33 of the notwithstanding use of that clause? I'm not sure. But so your equation, which is if you do anything, you have to use Section 33, is not correct. But I agree with Mayor Carter. This is a crisis. It's an urgent crisis. We need to take decisive action, and that may require Section 33. If it does require Section 33, then we're asking the province and the federal government to consider that, given the ultimate goal of what you're trying to do. You're trying to make sure people recover. And they have a pathway to a healthy lifestyle. What's wrong with that?
Mayor Liggett.
Well, I would say that if we're asking the Premier to take this huge, massive step, then we have to have the steel in our backbone to say, yes, this is necessary. We've got your back. Please have our backs.
And do you? Do you as a group of mayors have that steel in your back?
Well, I would say a large part of us did. We work by consensus in that caucus, though, so we tried to come out with the best motion that we could put together based on all the different viewpoints around the room. When we went into it, I would say, yes, we probably did have the majority for that, but working by consensus, that's how we got the water in the wine, as you would put it. I agree with you 100%. Like what you tell me, what leader of a province is going to go into something as drastic as this without knowing that he has the other leaders of this province supporting him when he does that, especially with an election potentially coming up next summer. Well, we better have his back if this is what we're going to ask him to do. Premier
Ford has shown in the past that he's prepared to use the notwithstanding clause on other things. And he doesn't care if people support him or not.
I think he does in this one.
In this case, he does.
I think he does. And we've opened the door with this motion for him to be able to use it. But you're right in asking that question. You know, maybe he needs to hear it publicly. Maybe more mayors need to come on board and say that they have problems in their community.
And I'd say as well, Steve, I mean, City Hall in Brantford is in the middle of the city. It's downtown. Every day I drive into work, you know, I see what's happening on the streets. And you know what I find most heartbreaking are those that probably have some kind of serious mental health issue. And you see them there day after day. And you can tell that they're living a tormented existence with I couldn't even imagine their internal demons. And we're saying in defense of Section 33, they should remain there without the necessary compassionate care and treatment that they need to recover? How's that compassionate? How's that humane?
Mayor Carter wants in.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, all across this nation, this conversation is happening. British Columbia has taken talk about what they need to do differently. Alberta is taking bold steps. I know Brunswick is having bold steps in regards to what they're looking at. This is a national conversation. And I think that what's happening is it is finally in a place where I think those that are provincial leaders and federal leaders can see that there is an absolute appetite in regards to a different pathway forward because we want to see the deaths stop. We want to see a solution brought forward. And we also understand that that all of us are going to get really uncomfortable with some spirited conversations, but it's worth the conversation because it will save lives.
Mayor Nuttall.
I think that there's some things that are being brought together that don't necessarily exactly fit, but they influence each other. When you're talking about addictions and mental health treatment and some mandatory care related to that, we're also talking about encampments and the situations around encampments, the violent situations we see inside of encampments. Oftentimes we have guns that are found, certainly knives that are found. You know, the Section 33 piece is not up to a group of mayors to determine. It is up to the provincial government to determine how they bring legislation forth to meet the requests and demands of the mayors. And that is what we're asking the provincial government to do. Determine where and when to use it. On the encampments, it certainly, from everything that I've seen and everything that we've discussed, it appears that a Section 33 will be needed. When it comes to the mandatory treatment, if the beds are there, the hospitals are there, the funding's there to support and help these individuals, there may be a way to move through it without a Section 33.
Well, that's the question, though, isn't it? Are those wraparound services there? Is that, are those support services there? Are those homes there?
They're not, but they will be, I believe, if we see the increase in funding and if the government takes it as seriously in the next 2 or 3 years as they have in the last 2 or 3 months. The Heart Hub funding is a significant step forward in the province of Ontario. It's only 10 centres right away, 19 overall. I would guess that we need centres in every geographic region, and we're not going to do it with just that announcement. There's got to be a lot more.
Mayor Patterson, I haven't heard of Mayor Patterson in a bit, so let me get him in here. You know, there was well, I don't know what else to call it. There was a shocking and violent attack in one of your encampments in Kingston not that long ago. There were fatalities involved. I mean, people in Kingston are asking the question, people all over Ontario are asking the question, what do you need to do to make sure that that kind of thing is brought to an end?
Well, I think that this really goes to the heart of our call that, quite frankly, we've been talking about this for over a year, about the importance of having the tools, having the legislative tools or the resources to be able to effectively deal with the very serious side effects that we've been seeing with encampments. I think that the biggest challenge for me was that that tragic event that happened back in September, it didn't need to happen. We had seen all sorts of warning signs. There were all sorts of dangers. And again, I'm not talking just even to the surrounding neighborhood. I'm talking about the health and security of those in the encampment themselves, those that are just trying to make ends meet, to try to get through the challenges that they're facing. And not being handcuffed and not being able to help address their safety, as well as the safety of the surrounding community, it's been incredibly challenging and frustrating, I think, for myself and for everyone at the city. And so that is, as you've heard, this is where we're asking the provincial and federal governments to step into the fray here. Give us the tools, give us the guidance, because we're all struggling with it. And I think, it's been said by a couple of my colleagues, the courts are making these one-off decisions based on specific circumstances on the ground, and then suddenly, we don't know. Communities don't understand. Okay, what can we do? What can we not do? How do we best address the safety of everyone involved? So, I think that this is a big challenge. Yes, and at the same time, do we need more resources and more treatment? Absolutely. I tell the story in Kingston about how there's one publicly funded treatment center in Kingston. It has a 6-month waiting list, and it's only open to men. We need more resources for treatment and for recovery, and so places where supportive housing for people to be able to go in encampments, and we're trying to do all those pieces, but we also need the tools from the province to be able to deal with the real dangers that we're seeing in encampments.
And that was a major improvement at what happened at the Friday meeting of the OBCM, and that was really bolstering the sections of the revolution.
Big City Mayor's Caucus.
Ontario Big City
We
Mayor's.
hate acronyms here.
Okay, the Ontario Big City Mayor's Caucus. But anyway, the sections that make the request to the province to expand and bolster the treatment system, that was actually strengthened. And that's an excellent point, because the treatment hubs are a good initial step. Much more is needed both for involuntary treatment and also for voluntary treatment. Plus, there's a section there that I really like, and that's diversion courts. When you talk to people who've recovered from a lifetime of addiction, like Marshall Smith, who is Chief of Staff for the Premier of Alberta, he will tell you that it was getting involved in the criminal court system and being given the option of treatment and rehab. That is often a great pathway without involuntary treatment to recovery. And the problem with our diversion court system here in Ontario is it's not widespread enough, and you don't have the resources to back it up. So that if there is a rehab referral and someone chooses to take it to avoid going to jail, it isn't there in many cases. And so that's a big part of this resolution, insisting the provincial government do more to bolster and expand the system that's there for treatment.
So, okay, go ahead, Mayor Liggett.
So
and then Mayor
as you may know, I did a poll, I commissioned a poll that went province-wide that came out in August, right, and it was delivered at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, to not do an acronym. And in that, 4 out of 5 people said they wanted to see a dedicated fund created to solve these issues. But when I look at what the province had was delivering, and I think it's $384 million, if I'm correct, to go to solve this problem.
For heart hubs.
That's absolutely nothing, because there's no bricks and mortars, there's no staff to provide for this, whether it's mental health or whether it's addiction. There's none for detox, for rehab, and then recovery beds are a big thing. You know, that's the biggest part of rehab, is the recovery beds. So I just estimate if we had that $1 billion a year that was lost as revenue from the license plate stickers, if we could have $1 billion a year dedicated to this, within 5 years, I think we'd be at a point where we could see some daylight at the end of the tunnel.
It may get worse. I understand next week we're going to hear that we're about to get $3.2 billion worth of $200 checks in our pockets.
Yeah, well, would
you rather have that money to spend?
I would rather, and part of the poll was I wanted to know if people were willing to spend more money in taxes to offset the cost of this. Surprisingly, a lot of people didn't even know what the services were in their own communities. So
I got about a minute and a half to go. Alex Nuttall, for you.
Well, I think one of the questions you asked earlier was with regards to the Premier and other levels of government. And I think the Premier actually has answered questions on this. He has said, in response to the motion that Kevin drafted with everybody who's here, that he did want the mayors to ask him to do something, that he did support the mayors coming together and taking on this motion and providing some advice to the provincial government. And so I think that that's a good step forward, because it's a recognition this problem is so bad that we need the multiple levels of government working together. We hope to get there with the federal government as well, because it's going to require funding from the feds, it's going to require the services from the province, and it's going to require the bylaws from the municipalities.
Thank you, everybody. I want to thank our 5 Your Worships for coming into TVO tonight, both actually and virtually, to help us out with this very complicated discussion. Brian Patterson, the Mayor of Kingston, Dan Carter, the Mayor of Oshawa, and here in our studio, Jan Liggett, the Mayor of Cambridge, Alex Nuttall, the Mayor of Barrie, Kevin Davis, the Mayor of Brantford, who's also a Ticats fan, I think.
I am.
I knew there was something
and a
about
Brantford
you I
Bulldog
liked.
fan, too.
And the Bulldogs, too, which also used to be in Hamilton. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time tonight here on TVO. Has there ever been a more intriguing personal journey by a Canadian journalist than Michael Coren's, once a conservative provocateur? Actually, no, let's call him what he often was, a pain in the ass. To staunch Catholic, to Anglican priest with a giant heart for those among us who are different from the majority. Michael has written a lot of books over the years, but his newest is about him. It's called Heaping Coals, From Media Firebrand to Anglican Priest, and it brings Michael Coren back to our studio, for which we are grateful. It's great to see you again, my friend. How are you doing?
Great pleasure. That's Father Pain in the Ass, by the way.
Excuse me.
Get it right.
Reverend Father Pain in the Ass. Very good. This is a book about your life, so I want to go back to the early days. You growing up in England, you're at a friend's home, your friend's father screams at your friend to get you out of the house. What did he yell?
Well, just to give background, I just met this kid in the park. Innocent days, we were playing soccer together, and he said, want to come back to my house for a cup of tea or something like that? And so he didn't know me, and then the father came in and started screaming. I wouldn't swear, but is he an effing Jew? And I sort of remember that the kids have, he didn't know. barely knew what a Jew was. And then the father, he is, isn't he? Get him out of here. And I left, and I suppose I should have registered. It didn't really click. And as I said in the book, I should have said to him, only half. Could I at least stay for lunch? But, and I didn't tell my dad, who was a very, quite a physical man, you know.
Your father was Jewish, your mother was not.
Exactly. And my dad was a boxer and a champion in the RAF. If I told my dad, I know he would have gone round there and reasoned with this man. Let's put it that way.
Reasoned with him.
But I didn't, and I didn't even think about it. But years later, and it's not that it's trauma, I just thought, my golly. And I didn't meet anti-Semitism very often. I lived in an area, an annex of East London, where there was quite a big Jewish community. It's a minority, but big enough. But we got along generally. But that was, some old ghost, an old fascist, and this poor kid.
This poor kid you ran into many years after the fact, and you had a kind of an interesting rendezvous. Tell us about that.
It was an airport departure lounge, and he was looking at me, and I was looking. I mean, I had hair back then, so I've changed quite a lot. But I vaguely recognized him, and we approached each other, and he said, do you remember? And I said, well, I do, actually. And he said to me, I didn't know what a Jew was. I didn't know what he was saying to me. He said, but I do now, because I think he said, I am one. I married a Jewish girl, and I converted. And we didn't exchange details. I mean, I haven't seen him since then, but it was a remarkable story. And I mean, parents can do terrible things to their children emotionally. Tom Sharp, the writer, great comic writer, British writer, he died, but his father was a paid-up member of the fascist party in Britain. I think he was a Nazi. But Tom Sharp said, I just thought it was all nonsense and rubbish, and I totally rejected it. And obviously, in this case, this boy did as well.
Another day, a Jewish kid at your school is getting picked on, and he decides to rear back and slug his tormentor right in the face, and the bully backs off. Now, the lesson one might take from that is peace through strength. Is that the lesson you want to impart? Because you tell that story in the book.
Yeah, I do. Actually, that was a third party. There was a guy there who shouted out, oh, you bloody Jew, or something like that. And I'm not going to say his name, but I remember the name of the guy. And he was always larger than everybody else, sort of more mature, and I think reached puberty long before anybody else. And it's like slow motion. He looked, and he just went over. And you don't see this at school level. He punched this kid who just seemed, I think he was unconscious. Certainly, he seemed to be lying on the floor, completely out of it. But I don't to make it seem as though I was raised in a hotbed of anti-Semitism. It was very, very unusual. I think that's why I remember those cases where it was an issue. And I didn't feel ambiguous on what side am I. I mean, I knew being half Jewish was enough. I qualified.
But that's a long way from turn the other cheek.
I hadn't seen the light of the gospel at that point.
Well, okay, let's touch on that because, as your life continues in the United Kingdom and then eventually over to Canada, you start getting a lot of profile as a guy who knows how to write. And you still say, though, that even though you were gaining this good reputation, this great reputation as a solid writer, you felt something was missing. Did you have any idea back then what was missing?
No, that's a very good question. No, I didn't. I've never been content. I mean, I've been most content the past 10 years, but I've always admired people who are content. My oldest friend, Steve, the best man in our wedding, saw him just a few weeks ago in the UK, has always seemed to be content, and I wasn't. And so I don't think it's as sophisticated as I knew faith was missing. I just knew something was missing. I'd become a Catholic in Britain I was about 24 years old or so, but it was more an intellectual conversion, which is not to criticize Catholicism, but for me, I don't think it was deeply spiritual. So no, there was, is there a God-shaped vacuum in all of us? I don't know. Maybe we're just hungry. But for me, I knew there was something that wasn't quite there.
Here's an excerpt from the book. Sheldon, you want to bring this up, and I'll read along for those listening on podcast. The night of my baptism, you write, Michael, I shook like a frightened child. I was in my early 20s, a grown man, but I felt so young and so weirdly vulnerable. I knelt in front of the huge, beautiful altar and felt something I could never then and can't now properly put into words. The gentle but powerful touch of Jesus. The reassuring coat of certainty put around my shoulders, a relationship with God dressing my naked soul. It was the first time I'd felt what I'm sure was the Holy Spirit. Tell us more about, first of all, when did that happen? And tell us more about how you experienced it.
That was in my mid-20s. And what was interesting was it didn't stick, if you like, which is down to me. That's my failure. But when I was received, I was baptized and confirmed on the same night because I hadn't been baptized as a child. And it was, as I mentioned, an intellectual conversion. But later on, I felt something that I couldn't explain. I'm a pretty rational person. And I couldn't explain what was happening to me. And I remember feeling as though I had to go out on the street and run up to people and say, you've got to believe, you've got to understand. I didn't. But it was it was like being bathed, warm water, reassurance, and being held. And I felt that for some days. But you have to continue the relationship. It is a relationship. It's like a marriage. If you just go your separate ways and never have any contact, the marriage ain't going to last. And by prayer, listening and reading and reaching out, you have to have a relationship with God. Any religion would tell you that. And certainly I can only speak as a Christian. It's essential. I didn't do the work. I thought, well, that's good. That felt really good now. I'll just get on with my life. And it's not that you lose the conversion, but you lose the faith relationship.
You are a journalist, or you were a journalist. I don't know. Do you still consider yourself one?
Yeah, I mean, I write for the British press now more than I ever did when I lived there, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you are a journalist, and the first thing they tell you in journalism is when something happens, check it out. Don't take anything on faith. Check it out. Your mother tells you she loves you. Don't take it on faith. Check it out. Why did you not distrust immediately that which you were experiencing?
I think I did in a way. I questioned it. I've always been a cynic. I have to watch that in myself because I'm a strange combination. On the one hand, I cry. The kids will make fun of me. Dad's going to cry any moment. I mean, I cry at all sorts of movies, and I cry when Tottenham win. And I mean, I'm an emotional person. But on the other hand, I am quite cynical. I think that's a mother-father influence on me. And I did, and I probably did allow, in fact, the cynicism to dominate the beauty of the moment. What is really going on? Oh, Mike, you've been eating well, you've been exercising. I mean, it's just it's a physical, emotional reaction to a momentous event. It's not deeper than that. Those things always creep in to any religious person. You have to work to push them out, and you have to arm yourself with arguments, internal arguments against them, and I don't think I did.
You eventually moved to Canada. Yep. You settle in Toronto. You meet a woman who becomes your wife, is still your wife.
Well, that's why I came, for her, for love.
And your father doesn't come to the wedding.
Yeah.
Why not?
I haven't thought about this in a while. I came here in '86 to give a lecture at U of T, and this beautiful woman came up to me at the party at the end of the conference and said, "You are amazing." And thinking this may never happen again, I married her. I was right, it hasn't happened again. And we got married over here in a Catholic church. My mum was there, and my dad said he couldn't. In fact, it was more visceral than that. He said, if I saw my son married in a Catholic church, I think I'd be physically sick. And that made me very upset, and we had an argument, and he was a working class man from Tottenham, Hackney.
Taxi driver.
Taxi driver. He hated no one. He wasn't religious. It was such a break. There was one thing. I mean, he loved my wife, his daughter-in-law. When we went over, I remember he cut out all the times of midnight mass that we could attend. I think it was just that the physical reality of seeing this break with everything. You know, his parents were immigrants from Eastern Europe and Russia, and I'm ashamed, actually, that I was angry with him. It was my wife who said, try and understand. And empathy, if I could pray for anything for the world, it will be empathy. Feel what other people are feeling. And at the time, though, I reacted with anger. And I apologized to him, and he apologized to me. But look, we don't go around being perfect. That's not how we operate. What we should do is go around saying, I was wrong. I'm sorry for that. And if we can, I mean, forgiveness, lack of forgiveness is destroying us. If we can forgive and we can understand and can empathize, we will develop and mature as people.
Again, at this time, you are becoming well known as a kind of a conservative, firebrand, fire-breathing provocateur.
Or to use the earlier phrase, pain in the ass.
Well, okay. Was this a brand that you sought to create for yourself?
Not really. Well, it wasn't affectation. I never said, I don't believe this, but I'm going to say it because I want to have a certain profile. But where did it come from? Because it wasn't the way I was raised and it wasn't the way I had been. I was embracing conservative teachings in the Catholic Church. There are many Catholics who are very progressive and liberal, and I looked to authority and the magisterium, and that enforced my social conservatism. I mean, I wasn't right-wing on every issue. I was against the death penalty. I had Palestinian leaders on my radio and TV show when they weren't given any room in media, really, and pro-welfare state, pro-socialized medicine. But on moral issues, sexuality and abortion, and I was very conservative.
Here's something you're not going to want me to play, so we're going to play it.
Oh, Lord.
This is you on this program 13 years ago, criticizing our mostly Catholic prime ministers for not being Catholic enough. Sheldon, roll it, please.
Most of the prime ministers of this country have been Catholic.
In a way. In a way.
In a way, you say.
In a way. This is a problem because Jean Chrétien was very, very anti-Catholic. Dan McTeague, who recently lost his seat in the election, I mean, Dan allegedly, I think this happened, went up to Chrétien face to face and said, why do you hate the church? Why do you hate the church? Paul Martin had more of a sympathy for the church, but he hid it very well. Trudeau was a playing Catholic. Turner, there's more Catholicism there, and maybe a bit more with Mulrooney, but they haven't ruled as Catholics. It's one thing to be a Roman Catholic.
But are they supposed to?
Yes, they are.
They're
yes.
supposed to rule as Catholics?
They're meant to be Catholic in everything they do. I mean, if you said to your wife, look, I do love you at home, but I can have an affair outside, it wouldn't be much of a marriage. You're a Catholic, you're a Catholic, you're a Catholic.
Oy vey.
As they say in the scriptures. Oy vey. What do you think when you see that guy?
Want to punch him? No, I would turn the other cheek. Honestly, Steve, there's an arrogance there that appalls me. It's not that there is such an overconfidence in believing what I said was right. I believe certain things today, but my golly, I'm open to other points of view. And part of that was not inaccurate, but I cringe. I mean, I've spent almost 11 years now trying to put right damage I caused, far worse than that, by the way, because there I'm criticizing powerful people who can take care of themselves. But it's been a difficult decade, not now, but in the early years, and I was roundly attacked by my former allies and so on. But yeah, I would really emphasize this. It's not just that what I said was wrong. There was such overconfidence that everything I believed was, even the title of the book, Why Catholics Are Right. Mm-hmm. By the way, if I could sell as many copies of these books as of that, I'd be a happy man, but that's beside the point. Because certainty does sell, and ambiguity and nuance, it's more difficult, and what is really being said here. But what I realized, and it was only a couple of years after that, really, and when I say Christianity, this is not to exclude other people, but faith is a dialogue. You have to have a conversation with yourself and with God about what is really going on. I believe the Word of God is not the Bible. The Word of God is Jesus. And we then read the Bible through interpretation, through the prism of intelligence and life experience, and come to understand things. I'm changed all the time by the people I meet. And at that point, I wasn't prepared to listen to other opinions and other voices.
Do you remember the moment when that guy became less arrogant, became more empathetic, became more willing to listen to other opinions?
It wasn't overnight, it was gradual. And the issue that really changed it was the issue of equal marriage, gay marriage, and full inclusion and acceptance of gay people. And that was through friendships with particularly gay Christian men who remain dear, dear friends. I'm speaking to one actually just yesterday in the UK. And I began to rethink and challenge myself, which wasn't easy because I was in a very comfortable position. I mean, what has always amused me is some of the attacks are, well, he did all this just for money. I think to myself, if only you knew, because you know, I was speaking all over North America all the time. I had columns in dozens of Catholic publications. The book was selling everywhere. There was me, this persona of the conservative Catholic person on TV and radio, and it wasn't so much that worried me, it was my friendships and personal relationships, close relationships that ended, people who turned on me or people who just said, you've betrayed us. But it was gradual. The door was opened, so I then pushed the door, I met more, I encountered more, and then when I spoke out a little bit, just softening my opinions, the attacks on me, or both the love that was thrown at me and the hatred that was spewed at me, made me realize there's a lot further to go.
I have an example of it right here. Sheldon, board 2, if you would, please. Here you go in your book, Heaping Coals. There were accusations that I was a child abuser and an adulterer, a thief and a fraud, and that my change of heart was all for the money. The latter was particularly odd in that my professional career would largely evaporate in the coming months. I'd lose 5 regular newspaper columns, 14 speech opportunities, a book contract, 2 radio shows, and a television hosting position. There is none so angry as a homophobe scorned. Good line. Did you anticipate the backlash?
Yes and no. I knew there'd be a reaction, and we were chatting before the show. The Catholic Register accounts of my column, fully understandable. If you leave the Catholic Church, even if they wanted me to stay, people would write in and say, how could you have him writing here? But it was the extent of it. Almost everybody seemed to say, no, you can't be here anymore. And people I thought were reasonable people, because my faith had strengthened, if anything. I'd moved over to the Anglican Church, but there were non-Catholic publications and media platforms that said, you're gone. We can't use you anymore. And which is why I will always be so grateful to the Toronto Star, who actually, someone wrote to me and said, let's try out a column. If people revolt and say, Michael Coren in the Toronto Star, that was many years ago now. But it was shocking, the extent of it. And I did sit down at one point and think to myself, whoa, what have you done here? Because, you do have a family, and how are you going to pay the bills? And maybe I was irresponsible, and I couldn't have done otherwise. I had to do, I was being called to do something. But, I restored things. It took a long while, but it did hurt. People I'd known for many years who just said to me, you're gone, we'll never use you again, end.
Someone recommended you become an Anglican priest, and your initial reaction, I gather, was to say, can't do that. People will think I've lost my mind. Was that, in fact, the reaction you got when you decided to go down that path?
There were a few people who said to me, why don't you become a priest? Because I became an Anglican, and a couple of years later, there were several people, and I said, I would be, no. Absolutely not. My career was starting to build up again, and it just didn't interest me in any way. I didn't think I'd be suited. But there are things I don't want to talk about on TV, but on a personal level, it was actually very difficult in some ways, going to seminary. It put a lot of strain on me. And even for 3 years at Trinity College, there were times when I thought, I'm not sure if I can continue with this. I'm absolutely delighted that I have done, and it's all worked out wonderfully well. But I mentioned earlier my oldest friend, Steve, who was sort of raised, well, he wasn't really raised Anglican, but Church of England. I never wear the collar when I'm with him, because he just, what? I just don't get it. And I don't want to make him feel uncomfortable in any way, but he just does not get. Many other people, though, friends, were delighted. Absolutely did. I've been amazed at how many people, almost vicariously, they like the fact that Michael's become a priest. I like that because, I don't know, it does something for them. They feel somehow attached to a deity. I'm not really sure, but yeah, it's been both wonderful and very bad as well. But more in the past, not now.
As we sit here taping this discussion, it is the, holy cow, it is the 53rd anniversary of Bill Davis's first majority government.
Really?
It is the 49th anniversary of Carlton Fisk's fantastic 12th inning home run in Game 6 of the 1975 World Series. And it is the 5th anniversary of your having been ordained as an Anglican priest.
Or as a deacon. Yeah,
as a deacon.
Yeah, you're ordained, so you're a deacon first. That's the big one. You're ordained.
Okay.
And after that, unless you do something appallingly bad, you're priested, and that was a couple of years later. But the ordination is the big one.
So you're in good company on this anniversary.
Apparently so.
With Bill Davis and Carlton Fisk.
And I'm going to pretend I understand baseball now and say, yeah, brilliant.
The question I have for you, though, is what would your Jewish taxi driving father think about this latest development in your life?
Phil Coren, what would he think? I like to think, one of the hardest parts of the book was writing about my parents. I think he'd be very proud. Is that just me saying that. No, I do think he'd be proud because I saw him evolve as a person as well. And I don't think I'm saying that just to make me feel good about myself. I do. Steve, I know at my best I do good. I help people. And he was a good man. He was an emotional, loud man, but he was a good man. And I think he would have seen the goodness I aspire to, and he would be proud of me.
For those who are not necessarily up on their Romans in the New Testament, we should explain the title of your book, Heaping Coals. What is that a reference
Which
to?
is not my title. I had a pretty bad title, actually, but it was someone at the publisher who suggested it. And I try, and I think I do quite well in this, I don't respond rudely to attacks. I block people on social media. I've blocked many people.
You're the only guy I know, in fact, on X who turns the other cheek. People say the worst things about you, and you are very cheery in response.
Well, before you think I'm too wonderful, if you don't get angry and don't seem to be hurt, it drives them crazy.
Yeah.
So that's the best response. But heaping coals in Scripture, when people attack you, respond with love and kindness. I mean, apart from being the Christian thing to do, you will heap coals on them. I mean, Twitter X is in very bad shape, but I still have quite a big following there. And I have to, as a priest, use it for the positive. And when people attack me, sometimes I'll mock a little bit, in a gentle way. But if I respond angrily, I am really failing. To wear the collar, and there's a photo of me in a collar, you've got to do it. You've got to do the job. You've got to walk the walk. So yes, I try to respond with understanding. Sometimes they'll DM me and say I'm sorry. Not often, I have to say, but sometimes they will. But either way, you know what it's like. You're not responding often to that one person. You're responding for the thousands of other people who are reading the way you responded.
Let's call that progress.
I'd like to.
Yeah, good. The book is called Heaping Coals, From Media Firebrand to Anglican Priest. It is a terrific read. I learned, I've known you for, I don't know how long, 35 years, something like that. And I learned a lot about you and really loved the book. So congratulations.
Thanks, mate. Really appreciate it.
Michael Coren. And that is the agenda for Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024. Tomorrow on the program, we'll look at Canada's unprecedented diplomatic dispute with India. Hope you'll join us for that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.